and tried to do it with accents, and I was terrible at it. So I'm just going to keep it my regular voice because it was going in and out and I wasn't doing it well at all. So this is chapter 4, Bern's story. When I met Albrecht, I was climbing over a mound of wriggling furry puffballs that were my brothers and sisters. The first thing I noticed was his nose. It was huge, pressed flat against the glass, and it resembled a pig's nose. All I knew was 2 black caverns were now steaming the front of the aquarium. I pressed my paws to the glass. He pulled back and chattered excitedly to his mother. "Did you see that, Mum? He waved at me. 'Hello, little guy.' Look at him. He's like monkey smart. Oh, Mom, can I have him, please?" He danced from foot to foot. His mother eyeballed me from a great height. All I could see was her chin and a pair of disapproving eyebrows. She said, "I am not comfortable with bringing pests into the house." He wheedled, "You brought me home from the hospital?" "Yes," she sighed, "and many things have been broken since then." Albrecht reached for his mother's hand. "Please, Mom." She squatted beside her son and pressed her face next to his on the glass. I drew back at the blowfish effect it had on her face. She sized me up with her hard blue eyes and said, "Albrecht, if I find this rat in my dresser, he is gone. If I find him in the pantry, he is gone. If I find him anywhere other than your room or in your possession, he is gone." "Yes, Mom, I hear you." Albrecht and his mother spoke to the pet shop owner, and before I knew it, I was bundled into a thin cardboard box and jostled for what seemed like hours. When the top opened, all I could see was a bright light. One of my older brothers used to scare us with stories of being bought to feed snakes. I wondered if my next sight would be a scaly mouth. It wasn't. It was Albrecht's spiky blonde bangs. His grin exposed 2 missing teeth in the front. He picked me up. "Ah, champion! Don't worry, Rat. We are going to be best friends." I bit him. I couldn't help it. I get nippy when I'm excited. He dropped me, and I weed on the carpet and ran under his bed. He scuttled as far as he could after me. I tucked myself behind the bedstead and watched his waggling fingers as he strained to reach me. He pleaded, "Oh, please don't run away. I'm sorry. Really, I am. You hurt me when you bit me. That's why I dropped you, please." I pressed my back to the headboard and ran up the wall. I landed on his comforter with a twist and ran across it. I peered over the edge. He was on the floor trying to wiggle further under the bed. He gave up and sat back to cry. I huddled on the edge of the bed and trembled at him. He sniffled and sobbed a little bit, and he wiped his eyes with his fists and his nose with his sleeve, and when all his snot and tears were sufficiently smeared all over his face, he looked up and saw me. I waved at him. His face split into his big jack-o'-lantern grin. "Awesome, you're okay!" He held out his hand and I climbed onto it. He held me to his face and brushed my fur against his cheek. I stood up and placed my forepaws on his eyebrow and sniffed his forehead. He stayed still for my inspection. I grabbed 2 hunks of his bangs and hauled myself on top of his hair. He said, "Hey, you're not going to pee up there, are you?" I make no promises, I thought. He stood up very gently and moved very carefully, like he was carrying a full bucket of red paint on a white carpet. Each step was measured, each breath was slow. I held on tight. He picked up a pirate hat from his dresser and held it up to me. I leapt onto it. He placed the hat on his head, and from that lofty vantage point, I was given a tour of the house. Albrecht's mother, Natalia, was a secretary to the undersecretary of the office manager of the German embassy. His father, Hans, was an architect. He designed playgrounds for the city and surrounding areas. They had a posh little flat with a modest garden that was very near Green Park, right off Embassy Row by Buckingham Palace. Albrecht explained all this as he ran top speed through the house. His breathless explanation was only interrupted when he took a deep gasp before jumping off things. He jumped from the back of the couch to the hallway, from the 4th stair to the landing. He hopped over the railing and slid in his socks over the parquet floor in the foyer. I stood on the hat's brim and used the feathers stuck in the hat band to lean out. My whiskers fluttered in the breeze. I was only a month old. So young, so fearless. He took me to the dinner table that night, and Natalia pointed her fork at us. No hats at the table. Albrecht set me in the hat gently on the table. I slithered under the hat and curled my tail around me. I watched the family eat. His mother cut her dinner in precise pieces. Each bite was comprised of the same ingredient. It was all carrot, or all quiche. His father speared bits of dinner haphazardly and shoved them in his mouth. Albrecht pushed a carrot under the hat. I pulled it toward me and started gnawing on it. Hans gestured at the hat with a piece of bread. Why is there a rat under Albrecht's hat? Natalia set her fork down and dabbed the corners of her mouth with her napkin. I didn't realize there was one, Albrecht. Yes, Mother, Albrecht muttered. Answer your father, she said. Albrecht took a deep breath. The rat is with me. I am training him to be a world-famous circus rat, and his first lesson is not to be scared of new experiences. Under the hat, I was shocked. Me? A circus rat? Albrecht finished in a rush. Today he's riding in my hat. I'd tell you about tomorrow, but he's listening. He lifted the hat to demonstrate that I was indeed listening. I obligingly stood up on my haunches with my ears perked and my tail curled over my toes. Natalia covered her smile with her napkin. Hans chewed thoughtfully while he stared at me. What did you name it? It's a he, Albrecht told him. His father chewed once more, then swallowed. Fine. What's his name? I looked at each of them in turn. What was my name? Before this, I'd only been son or brother. They all stared back at me. I smoothed down my whiskers, curled into a furry ball. Natalia giggled, then poked her husband's arm. Hans, look at his beautiful fur. Hans leaned across the table and peered at me. I wrapped my tail tighter around me. If he tried to touch me, I knew I'd nip him. He stood and walked around the table to squat beside me. He stroked his chin, then laid his arm over Albrecht's shoulders. I know. Let us name him Bern. Your mother and I spent our honeymoon in Bern, Switzerland. It's a lovely city. Natalia reached over to caress her son's hair and murmured, Albrecht's Bern. I like that. After dinner, Albrecht walked me to my cage. I was happy to burrow into my nest and sleep. It had been a long day. Albrecht stayed up to read comic books. When I woke up, he was on the floor building a road with wooden blocks. I tapped on the glass. He stopped and looked up. When he saw me waving, he grinned. Within 30 minutes, we had built a ramp of wood blocks with a safety net made of pillows. Albrecht held the bumper of the car I sat in. He asked, Are you sure, Bern? I gripped the wheel, nodded, and thought, Oh, yeah. Albrecht dragged the car backwards a few times to wind it, then he let go. I sailed over the ramp like it was greased. The car cleared the end, and I leapt from the pillow with a somersault. I rolled into a ball and punched into the pillows. I landed on my feet and squeaked, Awesome! Albrecht laughed and clapped his hands. We set up the car again. I hit the pillows and rolled again. This time I somersaulted all the way down. It spun my head, and I loved it. After at least a dozen more launches, we dragged ourselves to bed. I curled up on Albrecht's pillow beside his head. He sighed and laid his hand beside me. I smiled, reached out, put my paw on his thumb, and slept. Back at the tower, Ray had sat in front of me. He listened with his ears perked forward. He waved his paws in the air. Wait. You jumped a car into a pile of pillows? I looked at him. He was excited by a dumb trick I did as a young rat. He wasn't even shocked I'd let myself be domesticated so easy. I asked, Don't you think I should have run away? Why? He said. Albrecht sounds great. I rubbed my sore hip. He was. Hugin perched on a wooden beam near us. Dan, true to his squirrely nature, curled around an iron ring, hung with his arms draped over. That sentence made sense before. Dan, true to his squirrely nature, curled around an iron ring, hung with his arms draped over it, and kicked his feet against the wall behind him to a rhythm only he heard. Hugin patted the space next to her. Shush, Ray. Let's hear the rest of Bern's story. I continued. Albrecht came up with all kinds of training runs for me over the next few weeks. I met his friends and only nipped the rude ones who squeezed too tight. I did leave a few pellets in a girl's hand, but she was so disgusted with my very existence, I felt justified in leaving my opinion of her in my hand. Albrecht didn't mind. She departed at high speed, shrieking with her hand held before her like she wished it wasn't attached to her. He thanked me after she left. I loved showing off for Albrecht's friends. He strung a piece of yarn across his footboard and tied it to the decorative balls that stuck up on each side of the footboard. When I reached the middle of the tightrope, I would sway, swinging my paws side to side. After I got a little confidence, I'd slip upside down and bounce gently up and down. The gasps of the crowd only spurred on my fearlessness. Albrecht trained with me constantly. We slept next to each other at night. I found myself listening to him breathe before drifting off. He was my best friend. I lived to hear him say my name. That was why I was so crushed to learn about school. Albrecht would be leaving me for over half the day to spend it with others of his species. I dreaded his leaving every morning. The day stretched on forever when he was gone. I walked through the plastic tunnels of my rat home. His mother, Natalia, had gone a bit crazy over the various bits and bobs to entertain the domesticated rat. I was gifted with rope to climb, Technicolor wood blocks to gnaw on, plastic ladders with bells on, and endless, opaque, primary-colored plastic tubes that changed light when I ran through them. It was like running through a rainbow. Still, I was listless until Albrecht returned every day. I was running on top of my exercise wheel when Albrecht returned from school with amazing news. There was to be a show and tell. It would be our amazing debut to the public. Albrecht paced his room while he described the whirlwind tour we would be sucked into after the world saw our show. Royal performances would be requested, pictures taken, websites started, the works. We would be revolutionary. He swung his hands in the air, describing the theaters we'd play at. I was dizzy with excitement. I was 3 months old. What did I know? We started working on our routine every day after school. He would burst in his room, tear the top off my cage, and set me on his dresser so I could see him better. He would trace the movements across the floor, weaving and bobbing across the carpet. I studied his every move. We pushed ourselves. I fell. A lot. Finally, the day of the show and tell arrived. Albrecht slipped me into his jacket pocket before leaving for school. His teacher allowed us to go on first. Albrecht stayed outside the classroom while the teacher read an introduction off 3x5 cards that Albrecht had written with the help of his dad and a lifetime of adventure film dialogue. I could hear his teacher. In the annals of time, rarely have people known that they were attending a groundbreaking event. You are lucky in that you are being notified before so you can pay attention. There was a ripple of laughter, then the teacher cleared her throat. Witness the phantasmagoria, that's Dad's word, and wonder of man and rat working together. Put your hands together for Al and Bern and their traveling rat-tacular. The classroom swelled with cheers. I felt Albrecht run in. He yelled, "Welcome one, welcome all, have I got something for you." He pulled out a large manila folder, opened it, placed a sheaf of black construction paper on the desk, then held aloft a roll of tape like it was the sword Excalibur. I had watched his routine countless times, so I knew his every move. He held up a ring of black paper. He set it down. He picked up a long rectangle, which he taped end to end to form a 2. He attached the circle of paper to the inside of the flat ring. He talked as he taped. My dad makes playgrounds. He comes up with an idea, draws up plans, and it gets made. I like making things too. He held up the paper rings that now were beginning to look like a top hat. My favorite thing to make is friends. Albrecht gave a winning smile and tipped the hat up to tape the top on the circle. I exited his pocket and ran under the hat brim. He set the hat flat and finished his speech. I'd like you to introduce you to my friend I made recently, This is Bern." He lifted the hat and I stood on my back legs with my forepaws raised. I twitched a big hello with my whiskers. There was a group gasp, then applause punctuated with squeals of excitement. I did a few somersaults, a couple of cartwheels, and I finished by walking backwards on my forepaws with my tail in the air. Pretty cool stuff. Albrecht took the time I was distracting the class to build a ramp with a crash pile of pillows, then set up a complicated track that we had stripped from a mousetrap board game. When I finished walking upside down on my paws, I tumbled to the base of the track, held a silver ball bearing, and turned a slow circle so the entire class could see that it wasn't a trick of some sort. It was a real ball, and I was a real rat. They were holding their breath. I had them in the palm of my paw. At this point, I had to stop my story to wipe my eyes. I hadn't spoken of Albrecht for years. I didn't realize how much I'd missed him. I didn't get to say goodbye to him. That still stung. Fleur emerged from the shadows. I had no idea she'd been listening. She patted Ray's shoulder when she walked past. She sat beside me. I avoided her gaze, ashamed of my tears. She hugged me to her side with a wing and curled her head to whisper in my ear, "Courage, dear Bern. Your tale is worth telling." What happened next? I took a sip of my broth, wiped my eyes, and straightened my blanket. They watched my every move. Ray finally yelled, "What happened with Albrecht?" "Well," I said. As I said, the class held its breath. I dropped the ball into the gutter at the beginning of the maze. I gestured at every new part of the twining track. I pretended to listen for the bell to ring. I sniffed the basket that rose spinning up the tiny maypole. I ran beside the small mining cart that took the ball down its tiny track. I skipped and tugged my ears dramatically. I did a final cartwheel, landing at the base of the maze. The ball reached its final destination, dropped into a hole that threw a switch, and a driving cap dropped onto my head. I spread my arms and squeaked, "Ta-da!" The class threw their hands in the air and cheered. Albrecht raised his hand to shush them. He held a finger to show we weren't done. He held up a finger to show we weren't done. He motioned with his other hand to me. I was sitting in the car, gripping the wheel. The cheers became howls. His classmates rattled their desks and started chanting, "Bern! Bern! Bern!" I smiled. This was the life. Albrecht turned the key on the back of my car. He twisted it extra hard. When he released it, I shot across the desk, up the ramp, and into the air. I leapt upward from the car and felt it drop away from me to roll across the floor. I curled up, ready to hit the pillows that were piled up and waiting for me. The pillows that were piled against the door jamb. A roaming teacher opened the door and pushed the pillows aside. She looked at them in confusion, then looked up to see me hurtling towards her. She screamed and leapt aside. I missed her. I missed the pillows, but I found the floor just fine. I landed on my face, slid into the lockers across the hall, and uncurled with a groan. The class that waited in the hall took one look at me and dissolved from an organized line into a stomping, screaming mob. An enthusiastic boy in huge sneakers tagged the end of my tail with his toes. I shot straight up in the air with a squeak. The pain in my tail was way worse than the pain in my hip. I ran, and the grade schoolers went wild. All I could see were a bunch of hallways stretching ahead of me, going in all directions. Behind me was a stampede of 8-year-olds that even the adults looked scared of. And somewhere in that crowd, Albrecht howled my name. I didn't stop running. I couldn't stop. I'd have been trampled. A door opened. I saw sunshine and darted for it. I found an open hole that led to the sewer. I didn't think. I just ran for it. I don't remember thinking for a long time. I just ran, ate, and slept. I was behind a building, pawing through trash when the sun broke from the clouds. A beam of light fell across a circus poster that lay crumpled in front of me. The bit of picture I could see was a performer on a tightrope. I sat in front of it and thought my first thought in weeks. My first thought was, never again. Like always, Ray interrupted me again. "Why?" Why, what? I replied. Why, never again, he said. It sounded awesome. His eyes were shiny with excitement. I looked at him. Because of one slip, I said. I've lived ever since. And I lost my best friend. I lost my home. Ray protested. Oh, rats, Bern, you can't let a mistake dictate your life. The jump would have worked. I said, you can't know that. And he told me, well, you can't know that it wouldn't have worked if that silly cow hadn't pushed your pillows out of the way. And Hugin fixed your legs, so you're not going to limp much longer. And we've got a great home. He stomped his foot. Fleur smiled at Ray. And you're a great friend, Ray, she told him. He blushed and rubbed his nose in embarrassment. Dan dropped down from his ring and made his way to my nest, crawled up the wall beside me, and hung upside down nose to nose with me. He searched my furry face. Why did you not go back to Albrecht? He said. I couldn't find his house again, I said. I always arrived and left in a box. I only ever saw the inside. All I know, it's very near Green Park, right off of Embassy Row, by Buckingham Palace. I shrugged. Ray asked, you weren't running away from being a pet. You would have gone back. I was silent a moment and really thought about it. And I told him, at the time, yes. Ray looked shocked. Fleur sighed. Wow, she said. I completely misjudged you. I felt a shock of fear. Misjudged how? Did she think less of me now that she knew I was a Hume rat? I had not only willingly lived with a human, I had missed him when I left. I had done my best not to be a burden to anyone now that I was on my own. Sometimes it didn't matter. I'd seen things. Bad things happen to Hume rats. Society had a way of dealing with its cast-offs, and it wasn't usually pretty. She tapped her beak with her wingtip. I thought you couldn't understand the joy of movement, the thrill of pushing past your fear to pull off a truly amazing stunt or dance. You aren't a repressed artist. You're an injured aerialist. I'm a what? I squeaked. Well, maybe less of an aerialist and more of an acrobat, she said. I clapped my paws over my eyes. What? Dan patted my head. I am an aerialist. I am not happy if I have a paw on the ground. May we give me a free, unfettered air to fling myself through, and I am a happy little nutkin. This is where I got these. He flourished his front legs to show off all his various bandages. It is the price for being hardcore parkour. Ray's eyebrows shot up with interest. What's parkour? I sighed. That was all we needed. Ray interested in another dangerous activity. Dan explained that parkour was basically pretending the ground was covered in molten lava, and the goal was to leap on, over, through, or under things as spectacularly as possible. Ray's eyes got huge. Wow, he breathed. Dan waved his front paws in the air, motioning for Ray to slow down. Ray, mon ami, parkour is not just about being physically flexible. It is about being mentally flexible. He tapped the side of Ray's head with his claw. It is about using your own momentum to push yourself further forward than you ever believe is possible. Hugin nodded and then asked, How many teeth have you lost, Dan, being physically flexible? Dan smiled hugely and spread his forelegs wide. Only 2, mon ami. She smiled back. You're skilled. I dropped my paws. And what is an acrobat? Hugin cleared her throat. Acrobat is a noun. It means one who performs feats of daring do that require skill and balance. I laughed. Daring do? Me? Ray grabbed the edge of the nest and pushed his nose to mine. Yes, you! Most rats don't drive cars off ramps. Most rats don't live above ground. How could you keep this from me? It is so cool. We've been friends forever. I tell you everything, and you've kept this from me the whole time? I started to say something, and he cut me off. He pushed away from the edge of the nest. "You lied to me," he said. My jaw dropped. "I never lied to you." He balled his claws into fists. "You think that, do you? What about Rough and Tumble? You lied about them. What about Patches?" He pointed an accusatory claw at me. "What about you being a Hume rat? When were you going to tell me about that?" I threw my paws up. "When, Ray? When? When was the time to tell you I was a welfare rat?" He yelled. "Any time! I wouldn't have told anyone." He turned and stalked away. Dan watched us argue. He slithered up the wall and leapt from ring to ring until he reached Ray. They talked quietly. Ray glanced at me, then shook his head. Dan looked back at me and waved. They walked off together. Hugon said, "Well, that could have gone better." I pushed myself to my feet. "I should go," I said. Fleur pushed me back down. "You are not going anywhere." Hugon agreed. "You stay put. You need to recover before you leave. Puncture wounds are nasty beasts that get infected easily. Your wounds need to be cleaned, and you need to rest." "I'm fine," I said. "I'll keep them clean." I needed to find Ray. Fleur waved a wingtip dismissively. "You'll stay here, and that's the end of it," she said. I winced, then lay back. She was right. They both were. I needed to stay put, but I couldn't let Rough and Tumble find my urn. If they smashed it, I'd never get another built in time for Fleur's birthday. They left me in the nest to sleep, so I did. Hugon and Moonin checked on me throughout the day. Moonin brought broth and talked to me. I found that once I had mentioned Albrecht, I couldn't stop talking about him. Moonin was a kind ear to listen to my memories. In a moment of weakness, I said, I feel bad that I haven't worked my way up in the streets the way Ray has. But I don't want to feel ashamed about my early months with Albrecht." She chuckled. "I don't remember my mother. Hugon and I were brought to the tower when we were chicks. We were hand-fed by Frank, the beef-eater that's the raven master. There were other ravens, but they were older. They were allowed out in the courtyard and hardly ever associated with us younger chicks. Am I less of a raven for not having traveled like Fleur's mom?" I looked at her and said, I didn't mean... She shushed me. "I know what you meant. I'm telling you. I was raised by humans, and I am as much a raven as one that has spent its life circling the globe. The world comes to my doorstep to snap pictures, to hear the history of the ravens of the Tower of London, and I am part of that history. My name is a name of power. The tower is my home, and it will be my grave. My comrades and I are a symbol of stability for a nation. My wings are clipped, but my mind is free. I am all that is raven, no more, no less." She poked me in the chest. "What makes a real rat to you?" "And how are you lacking in those traits?" she asked me. I opened my mouth. She shushed me. "That is something for you to think about," she told me. "The answers will be yours alone." I opened my mouth. She turned to leave and left me with one last thought. And Bern, the answers will change with time. I watched her flapping wings recede into the darkness of the cathedral ceiling. I lay back and thought about rats, about ravens, about Ray, about Rough and Tumble, and about Daring Do. All right, that is chapter 4. So Bern's got some big decisions to make in his life. The next chapter is chapter 5, and it's called A New Day and a New Bern. And honestly, I have to say, this is when the adventure begins. All right, so stay tuned, and I will get that one posted too this week. I promise. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that you have a lovely evening tonight, and remember, drink your water, get your rest, and attack each day like it was your last, because life is short and there's not a lot of time to be incredible and be totally you. So lots of love from Aunt Dada. You kids take care of yourself, okay? Bye, littles.